Have you ever woken up feeling like you're just surviving, not living? Ever pretended everything's fine while inside you're falling apart? Ever looked in the mirror wondering how much longer you can carry this weight alone? What if I told you there's a man who spent half his life, trapped in deep depression, 3 to 4 episodes every single year, and today lives entire months without a drop of anxiety? What if I told you he was sexually abused from age 2 to 4, almost killed himself in college, had a date marked on the calendar, and today teaches millions how to optimize their lives? Would you believe there's a 5-day brain stimulation protocol that can eliminate chronic anxiety for 4 to 5 consecutive months? That a specific diet can take people with schizophrenia off 15 medications in 3 months? That stimulating one nerve in your neck can triple your energy in 4 weeks? Tim Ferriss has interviewed over 800 of the world's brightest minds, and in this podcast, he revealed the exact tools that pulled him out of hell. Not theory, not empty promises. Scientific protocols tested by someone who chose to live when dying seem like the only way out. I extracted 12 lessons from this podcast that can completely change how you see trauma, mental health, and building an extraordinary life. And if you're tired of trying everything and nothing works, if you're exhausted from faking strength you don't feel, you need to hear what comes next. Because maybe, just maybe, the answer you're looking for is in the next few minutes. The first lesson that hit me was Tim's method called DSS. He interviewed 800 brilliant minds and distilled a universal framework for learning anything in record time. Deconstruction, selection, sequencing, and stakes. Sounds simple, but the power is in the details. Deconstruction is taking a vague goal like learn Japanese and breaking it into smaller, concrete parts. Selection is the 80-20 principle that everyone talks about, but almost nobody truly applies. Tim discovered that with just the 500 most frequent words in any language, you reach reasonable conversational fluency in 8 to 12 weeks. 500 words. Not the thousands that schools try to cram into your head. Sequencing is the magic nobody talks about, putting things in the right learning order. He used swimming as an example. Forget about breathing at first. Learn to glide in the water first, the slide kicking off the shallow wall. Breathing comes later, and stakes are the strong incentives that ensure you'll actually do what you promised. Give $500 to a friend, and if you don't hit your goal, they donate that money to the politician you hate most in your name. Feel the pressure? This works because more information was never the answer. If it were, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs. The second lesson blew my mind because I always thought working hard at everything was the path. Tim showed me that's an illusion. Most people waste energy on things that simply don't move the needle. The secret is obsessively identifying those 20% of efforts that generate 80% of results. And then throwing everything at that. Nothing else. The rest is noise, distraction, corporate theater. You can be working 16 hours a day, but if you're not focused on the right 20%, you're just spinning the wheel like an exhausted hamster. The third lesson completely changed how I think about projects and career. Tim doesn't have a 5 or 10-year career plan. He says if you have a reliable 10-year plan, you're playing so safely within your limits that you're selling yourself short. Instead, he works on 6 to 12-month projects, but with one non-negotiable condition. Each project must build deep relationships or transferable skills that transcend that specific project. He told the story of StumbleUpon, a startup he advised that failed, but he became close friends with the founder, Garrett Camp, and learned tons about web traffic. 2 years later, Garrett called him about a new idea to solve the taxi problem in San Francisco. That became Uber. The first project died, but the relationships and skills remained and multiplied. That's playing the long game with emotional intelligence. But it's from the fourth lesson that the podcast dives into deeper, more disturbing waters. Tim started talking about mental health with brutal honesty. He said every mental health diagnosis and complication is increasing exponentially. Chronic anxiety, treatment-resistant depression, obesity, self-imposed loneliness. Everything's shooting up in a hockey stick curve. And when he sees a constellation of problems like that, he doesn't treat symptoms in isolation. He looks for root causes. And that's when he introduced me to something I'd never heard of. Accelerated TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. He worked with different scientists and did extensive self-experimentation. And when he did accelerated TMS, he had months of zero anxiety. It simply disappeared. He described it as if he'd meditated twice a day for an entire year. 4 to 5 months without any anxiety. Magic? No. Bioelectricity science. The protocol is intense. 10 sessions a day for 5 straight days. You don't do 2 or 3 sessions a week for months like traditional TMS. You bombard the brain with magnetic stimulation every hour for 8 minutes, for 10 straight hours, and repeat for 5 days. And the results are absurd. Tim told the story of a friend's teenage son, a 14-year-old boy who was cutting himself, self-harming. The parents were just waiting for the call that their son had committed suicide. This went on for 2 or 3 years. Within 3 days of accelerated TMS treatment, the boy returned to who he was before. And with boosters every 3 to 6 months, the result was durable. He used the word impossible to overstate the difference between before and after. From a safety perspective, the risk is minimal. It feels like someone gently tapping the side of your head. And this is saving lives. The 5th lesson introduced me to another revolutionary concept: vagus nerve stimulation. Tim was direct. The vast majority of what you'll find about this on the internet is pseudoscience garbage. But there's one scientist, Dr. Brian Tracy, one of the most cited in the last 30 years, who's doing serious work. The vagus nerve is actually 2 bundles of nerves with about 100,000 fibers each, traveling from the brainstem down the neck, touching practically everything in your body, including your gut. Tim talked about a friend, former elite military operator, who always had trouble sleeping due to sympathetic overdrive. He tried sophisticated breathing programs, gained 10 to 15% in heart rate variability, tried cold exposure, another 10 to 15%. Then he used vagus nerve stimulation for 2 to 4 weeks and tripled his heart rate variability. Tripled, not increased 10%. Tripled. He also mentioned people with rheumatoid arthritis who were practically bedridden, chronic fatigue, couldn't hold a job, barely able to interact with their own children. They had the neck implant procedure, the size of an omega-3 capsule, and 2 weeks later they were running upstairs to catch a train on a trip to Europe. The problem now was too much energy. The 6th lesson entered even more controversial territory: metabolic psychiatry. This basically means dietary intervention to treat psychiatric conditions. Chris Palmer at Harvard is popularizing this. The core idea is putting people on a ketogenic diet. Tim talked about people with schizophrenia who were treated with 15 different medications for an entire decade. Nothing worked. They put these people on a ketogenic diet, and in 3 to 6 months they came off all medications and stayed off, simply by stabilizing a few things in the brain, including providing a clean energy source, which is ketones instead of glucose. And Tim's also watching this for Alzheimer's prevention, because he has 3 relatives with the disease now and is genetically predisposed. He believes doing strict ketosis for 1 month a year, water-only fasting for 1 week a year, can strengthen mitochondrial health, cellular cleanup, and reduce plaque buildup in the brain. The 7th lesson was the emotionally heaviest. Tim publicly revealed in September 2020 that he was sexually abused by a babysitter's son weekly from ages 2 to 4. He has photographic, clear memories of everything, and that shaped who he is in profound and destructive ways. It robbed his agency, made him hyper-vigilant, slow to trust. Adding to that, he had a genetic predisposition to major depressive disorder. Starting in adolescence, he averaged 3 to 4 depressive episodes of multiple weeks or months per year. Half of his live time was lost to depression. He came so close to killing himself in college that he had a date marked on the calendar. What saved him was pure luck. He reserved a book at the university library about assisted suicide. The book was checked out, so the library sent a physical postcard to his address, notifying him the book had arrived. But Tim hadn't updated his address to his off-campus apartment. The card went to his parents' house. And when his mom called with a shaking voice asking why he'd reserved that book, he lied, but realized plausible deniability was gone. He couldn't make it look like an accident anymore, and that pulled him from the abyss in that moment. But what Tim said next was the real lesson. A very good psychotherapist told him 5 or 6 years ago, take the pain and make it part of your medicine. Transform all that horrible suffering into what you offer the world. And during the pandemic, his girlfriend at the time asked, have you ever thought about how many people will die from natural causes or COVID or anything else before you have a chance to write that book you plan to write in 10 or 15 years. Think of all the people you could have helped but didn't. And that made him record a conversation with a close friend, Debbie Millman, who had also suffered prolonged childhood sexual abuse. They published that conversation, and Tim said the most shocking thing happened. A quarter to a third of his closest friends reached out for the first time in their lives to confess they'd had similar experiences. The percentages were staggering. He got tearful voice memos from guys who'd never told anyone, giving graphic details of everything that happened. And in retrospect, he saw so many things click into place, explaining unanswered questions about those friends. For Tim, looking back and being willing to reopen that door was essential because he was treating 7 mental health problems as independent things. But when he went back to the childhood abuse, everything was connected to that. Sometimes you have to put on your gas mask and go down to the basement to confront it. The 8th lesson made me understand something about trauma I'd never thought about. People who survive abuse become, by necessity, very good at compartmentalizing. And Tim pointed out something disturbing. The percentages of guys in elite special forces military units who were abused are very high. Why? Because in battle, in chaotic environments where people are dying or at risk of dying, and you need to act effectively and calmly in the most disruptive, unpredictable environment imaginable, compartmentalizing is a superpower. You can detach and assume an observer stance, almost like watching yourself doing capture and kill raids. But when these guys return to civilian life, compartmentalization becomes a severe handicap and disruptor in family life. The superpower becomes a super weakness. And this is true outside the military context. People who survive abuse can completely bury the memory, lock it up, and throw away the key in the subconscious. Or they can say it happened, it was terrible. But there's no need to dwell on the past. I want to move forward. And Tim thinks that's a viable strategy. Not everyone needs to put on the hazmat suit and unearth everything bad that ever happened to them. That can make people despondent because you can't fix the past. In his case, compartmentalization was very enabling in sports, at work. His pain tolerance was incredibly high. But there's a price to pay when you cauterize certain aspects of yourself and disallow certain types of emotions. And for Tim, what brought emotions back online was almost entirely due to psychedelic experiences. He hadn't cried in 20 years, couldn't remember the last time. And then he was on a plane watching a compelling, heart-wrenching documentary and just started crying on the plane. Certain emotions simply came back online. And when those emotions returned, they pulled along the revisiting of these high-fidelity memories. He had a very rough period because of that, and decided to cancel everything for 6 months to try to find some resolution. He was basically having a nervous breakdown and wasn't sure he'd be able to function professionally anyway. The 9th lesson was simple but profound. Tim said all human behavior has evolutionary roots, and lone wolf independence is not in our programming. It simply isn't. When in doubt, revert to what people were doing a few hundred years ago. And he was categorical. Analog, human, in-person, social interaction is the one target that when you hit it, solves a multitude of other problems that otherwise you'd be playing whack-a-mole with. All mental health diagnoses are increasing, and self-imposed loneliness is at the top of the list. We weren't made to live isolated staring at screens. Period. The 10th lesson changed how I think about productivity and business building. Tim recommends everyone, especially entrepreneurs, take a 4-week mini retirement once a year where you're completely unavailable. No laptop, no phone except maybe Uber, Google Maps, and restaurant reservations. Literally unavailable. And he gave 3 powerful reasons. First, it allows you to play the long game at high intensity because you have this decompression phase. Second, it forces you to improve all your policies, rules, and guidelines for autonomous decision-making by employees. You need to clarify all of this regularly. And when you come back, all these system improvements endure beyond the mini-retirement. It's a forcing function. And third, it forces you to take a close look at the non-business interests you've maintained, cultivated, or let atrophy in complete disuse. And if you have a small panic attack because you don't know what to do with your time, that's a great wake-up call. You need other things to balance the type A maniacal focus of chasing that rabbit around the Greyhound track. The 11th lesson was about relationships and dating apps. And Tim didn't mince words. He said he hasn't met a single person who loves dating apps. Not one. And yet, what does the crack addict want? More crack. And they say they just need one more hit. That's not how it works. He called dating apps casinos designed to keep you in the casino. And if you're a healthy, sexually vigorous guy putting videos on YouTube, the flood of direct messages and abundance of temptations you need to resist will make staying single very attractive. And that's true for many of these guys. If they get on the apps, it's shooting fish in a barrel. He doesn't believe the apps, despite what they say, are designed to be deleted. He believes they're casinos designed to keep you in the casino. Follow the money, follow the subscription plans, and he talked about the paradox of choice. Yes, that person was an 8 out of 10, but man, that 9 or 10 is just around the corner. I know it's just a few thousand swipes away. And you keep getting these incredible dopamine hits of variable reward. It's like dog training, but you're training yourself with the dating app to keep using the app. Tim has close friends who go on 50 to 100 dates a year and are still single, convinced it's for lack of options. It's impossible. But they continue. The 12th and final lesson was about deep relationship prioritization. Tim does an annual review where he looks at his top 5 to 10 most important relationships and asks himself, did I spend the amount of time I wanted to spend with these people last year? If the answer is no, he reinvests in those people first. Always. Only the excess, what's left over, gets allocated to new relationships. He really focuses on tried and true proven relationships with deep levels of trust over long periods of time. And he has a system to ensure this happens. For 25 years, he's had an annual reunion around his birthday every summer where all his oldest friends show up. They know it's on the calendar. It's roughly the same date every year. And they fly in from all over the country, all over the world. It has nothing to do with his birthday. It's just a reunion of friends. And when asked how he'd spend his last day on Earth, the answer was immediate. With closest friends and family, no doubt. It wouldn't be pizza, wouldn't be an opium bender. It would be telling the people he loves that he loves them and spending time with them. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. Could be sitting on a porch in rocking chairs. And he's not waiting for the last day. He puts this into practice every year with blocked out periods of time exactly for this. I watched this entire podcast twice, paused, took notes, reflected, and these 12 lessons aren't abstract theory. They're survival strategies tested by someone who looked into the abyss, almost jumped, and then spent decades building a ladder to climb out. From 3 to 4 depressive episodes a year to 1 mild episode every 2 to 3 years. From paralyzing anxiety to complete months of peace. From buried trauma to shared medicine that saves hundreds of lives. This didn't happen by accident. It happened through systems, through brutal experimentation, through willingness to confront the darkest basement and bring light. And the message that remains is this. You're not alone. You're not uniquely flawed. This doesn't need to be personal and permanent. People have solved this. Tools exist, but you need to be willing to seek, test, fail, and try again. Because as Tim said, if more information were the answer, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs. Information is necessary, but not sufficient. What changes behavior is strong incentives and consistent action on the 20% that truly matters.